Everyone. My name is Liza Gentile, and I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations here at Johnson & Wales University and a proud alum. Thank you for joining us for Cook Along with JWU, celebrating culture through food. We're excited to bring you this program in honor of Black History Month and to learn and celebrate culture together. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. Please keep your cameras on, but your mics muted. Please feel free to turn on your mic and ask a question at any time. If you'd prefer, you can also type your question into the chat and I will read it aloud. The chat feature can also be used to message other attendees and is located at the bottom of your screen. I'd now like to introduce tonight's presenter. Chris Fiod, most recently known for competing on season 18 of Top Chef, is the chef and owner of Greenleaf and Ensemble, both located in Milford, New Hampshire. Chef Fiod's food is rustic in its approach, yet refined by classic techniques. Focusing primarily on seasonal products, most of which grown locally, helps to fuel his passion when creating menus. He plans and executes a balanced meal that incorporates different flavors and textures that entertain the palate, which allow for a unique dining experience each time. Upon graduating from Johnson & Wales University in 2012, he moved to Boston, where he spent 3 of his most formative years at Forbes 4-star rated restaurant Du Havre in the Back Bay, where he worked his way to sous chef. Since his time in Boston, he has been an essential part of multiple restaurant openings in the greater Boston and New Hampshire area. Chef Fiod has continually been working throughout the years to challenge himself by pushing the boundaries and constantly taking himself out of his comfort zone to hone in on his craft. He is constantly exploring new ideas, styles, trends, and concepts to keep fueling his passion and believes that every day there is an opportunity to learn something new. Please join me in welcoming Chef Chris Viaud. Chef, I will turn it over to you to get us started.
Thank you very much, Liza. I appreciate the introduction. I'm really excited to be joining you all today. And what a better place to be celebrating Black History Month than where it all began for me with my culinary journey right at Johnson & Wales. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you gained something out of this experience with me teaching a little bit about my Haitian heritage and some of the explorations that I've had learning about the food that I grew up eating. So just like a little brief introduction of me, where I've been and what I've been doing in the past couple of years. As mentioned in my bio, I went to Johnson & Wales. I graduated in 2012. From there, I went to Boston, and I had my most formative years just working in a French kitchen and learning all the techniques and classical approach to cuisine, food, ingredients. And from there, I never really had the real understanding of who I wanted to become as a chef. I was always being morphed into what society as a chef is acceptable. It wasn't until some recent experiences that I did have on Top Chef where I learned that it's okay for me to embrace and be proud of my heritage and learn how to cook the food that I grew up eating, as opposed to steering away from that and just cooking the more American approach. So a little bit of background on Haitian food. So Haitian food is like a mix of African, Taino from the Indian culture, Latin American, Asian. It has all these global influences due to the amount of slavery and slave trade and everything coming in through the States. And one important thing to note about Haiti itself is that it was the first Black republic that was freed from the slaves in 1804, which is incredible to see. And what that came with was a lot of debt to the French and the US. And unfortunately for Haiti, they have not been able to dig themselves out of all that debt. And they've been just like struck with natural disaster after natural disaster, with the earthquakes and everything that's going on with the political corruption. So even though as much as my heart wants to be in Haiti, I want to explore all these new things that I've been learning. I haven't been back to Haiti since 1998. And I know the country has changed so much, and there's beautiful parts of Haiti which I would love to visit. But even talking to my parents, my family, who does still live out, some of my family does still live out in Haiti, they've expressed that it's not safe. So what I can do in the meantime is just learn from my parents, my grandparents, and bring my siblings along this journey, learning through food, through exploration of our cuisine, and respecting and honoring everything that has come before us. So from that has sparked Ensemble, which is our family brand, and Ensemble is the Creole word for together. So that was a whole journey just to bring my siblings together to learn about the food from my parents, because of course I have a daughter now and I want to be able to pass that on for generation to generation, and I didn't want that food and those traditions to become lost. So that was a company that was developed just based off of exploration through wanting to dive deeper into my heritage and understand what the nitty gritty was about Haitian food. Why is it so special? Why is it so important to us as people, as a culture? And from there, we started launching these dinners throughout the community, which the Black community, or the Haitian community especially, is underrepresented in New Hampshire. So to be able to say that we're doing something like this, and each month that we put on these dinners has been so well received, has been truly incredible. I mean, we just launched our 1 year. We had a news publication there to feature us. So it's just tremendous to see the amount of growth and support that we've gotten from the community to be able to do things like this. So it's extremely special for me to be cooking one of these recipes from my mom today, one that we've been featuring throughout these ensemble dinners, and I'm glad to be sharing that with you. So of course I'm still new at it, and I'm glad to be working throughout all the kinks while doing some testing and hopefully making my family proud. So first thing I do actually have going on, which takes the longest, in my notes that you'd see if you're following along with the recipe, it says to soak the beans overnight. So the beans being soaked overnight, what that does is softens the beans to help them cook a little bit quicker. Now, although the beans were soaked overnight, I still wanted to make sure that I got them on the stove. And as you can see, they're kind of bubbling away over there, just to make sure that they do have the proper amount of time to cook, and I am able to execute the dish in the proper amount of time. So while the beans are going, the other thing that I have going on is I already washed and marinated the chicken in our spice blend, which is called épice. So épice is the all go-to marinade in Haiti. It has a mix of habanero peppers, red, green, orange, yellow bell peppers, garlic, a lot of garlic, olive oil, lime juice, scallions, parsley, thyme. And it's just this beautiful, flavorful marinade that is used for marinating a lot of our meats. Sometimes used as a base of making rice in our soup JWU, which is pretty much a celebrated dish that we celebrate the New Year. As we gained our freedom from the French in 1804, it's kind of just like that joyous reminder of where we came from. So we take that marinade and we have it just coating all the meat, and it's just been marinating right now just for about 30 minutes in here. So one of these steps in the recipe was to remove the skins from the chicken. Typically in the Haitian cuisine, we don't have all the skin that's surrounding the meat, and washing it is very important because in the culture in Haiti, you don't know too much about where your food or your product is coming from. So you'll often see them washing the rice, washing the beans, washing the meats that they're coming from, and using an acidified solution. So I have like a heavy lime juice and vinegar base in there. And what that helps is to preserve and make sure that the food is going to be safe to eat, because a lot of times in Haiti, there's no refrigeration. Only the rich really have refrigeration. So having these heavily acidified products helps to preserve the meat that's going to be staying after it's cooked, while it's marinating and things like that. So now that this is marinated, I'm just going to put it in the pot and just cover it with water. So while this is going into the pot, it is okay to just dump that whole marinade liquid in there, because you want to make sure that the meat is going to be fully seasoned once it's being boiled and cooked. So you want to make sure that there's enough water to cover all of the meat, because this essentially is going to be used as the braising liquid once we remove the meat from here and brown it in the oven. So now that I have the meat on the stove, we're going to set that on high. We're going to bring it up to a boil. And then once it comes up to a boil, we're going to drop it down to a simmer. While this is going, probably once it comes right up to a boil, I'll set my oven to broil, just because I know that with my oven, it does heat up very quickly with the broil setting. So I don't need to worry about setting it up too early. But each oven does vary. So if you're cooking along, you might need to preheat it a little bit quicker. But again, we're just using the broil feature on it. So it's just heating up the top part of the oven, and it should go fairly quick. So now that I have my chicken in here, it's covered with the water. I'm also going to add the spices in here. So I have pre-portioned already the same amounts that are in the recipe, but this is the garlic powder, adobo, and my family actually does make our own sazon and adobo, which is typically found for a lot of recipes, and it's just a mix of herbs and spices that are dried in here, and it helps to bring like some nice Caribbean feel and flavor into the dish. So again, in there is just the chicken, all the marinade, the garlic, adobo, and we have the salt and black pepper. Bring that up to a boil, and also I'm just going to double check my beans, make sure that they're doing okay in there, because we definitely don't want them to overcook. So part of the reason why, another reason why we do cook the beans first is we're actually going to use this bean cooking liquid for the rice. So diri kole is actually the national dish of Haiti. It is rice and beans. So a lot of times we use basmati rice because it becomes fluffier and you're able to separate the grains, and kidney beans. But oftentimes you can see black beans, pigeon peas, kidney beans, all different types of rices, grains, beans used in different types of cuisine. So also while we're getting the chicken going, it is now bringing up to a boil. I'm just going to cut one end of my bell pepper, and I'm actually going to use that for what's called a piqué. So a lot of times in even French cuisine, you'll see cloves being used in onions for even like making a bechamel or stuff like that. So in Haiti, they have that same principle where we use the bell pepper to hold the cloves in place and prevent us from having to fish them out of the braise once we're ready to pull everything out of there. Just so we know exactly, okay, there's 8 cloves going into the pepper. There should be 8 cloves coming right out of the pepper. And one thing you never want to bite into when eating Haitian food is the clove, because it's so strong, so pungent. And it's almost like the curse of the JWU is what clove is called in Haiti, JWU. So we have our pepper that has been picked with all the cloves. We're just going to go ahead and toss that right in with the chicken. And then still while that's going along, we can go ahead and do the rest of our knife cuts. So we have our red bell pepper, we have our green bell pepper, and that's going to be used in the stew as well. One thing that is noted in the recipe that I kind of used up beforehand and I forgot to replenish was my parsley. So I'm just going to make a bouquet garni just with the thyme sprigs, but of course in the recipe it calls for 6 sprigs of of parsley also. Now these cuts do not need to be perfect at all. You can be rustic with it, just as long as they are similar in size, so that way they cook in the same time frame. I know if a couple of you might have joined the other demonstrations. I know Chef Deldon was on doing some knife skills classes, which was great to see. And he kind of broke down the explanation of how you can kind of hold your knife, what position you should be holding, how your finger should be. And all those steps are, of course, very important when dealing with sharp tools and working very carefully in the kitchen. So we have our peppers cut, and then we're going to move next to our onion. And we're going to do the same thing with the onion, just cut it into thin strips, which can also be referred to as julienne. Oftentimes people ask what they can do with the scraps. And we use actually all the scraps to go into any stock that we're making, whether it be vegetable stock, chicken stock, beef stock, just as a way to use all the products. One thing about Greenleaf is that it is a farm-to-table restaurant, and we source a lot of our products from local farms throughout the area. And during the height of the season, in the spring and the summer, we can get anywhere from 85 to 90% of our products from just the local farm. So you can imagine that our menus are changing constantly. We always have to adapt and kind of switch the menus around depending on what ingredients are going to become available during what we call our micro seasons, which could reflect ramps, scallions, or some herbs, strawberries especially, which have such a short growing cycle. And we're just always cognizant of like realizing where we are in each season, what's going to be coming next, and how we're going to have our menus kind of reflect all of that. So I have my onions cut nice and thin. Peppers are going to go into a separate bowl, just because in the recipe we're only adding half the peppers and half the onions right during the beginning stages. And then the remainder of the peppers and onions are going to go towards the end after the meat is brown. There we go. So I'm just going to cut a piece of cooking twine. And that is what we are going to use to make our bouquet garni. So just imagine that I do have some stems of parsley in here. And the twine itself, again, acts just like the pepper would. It holds everything in place so that way you're not fishing out the ingredients when it's time to come out to remove them. So this is a Maggi cube or a bouillon cube. This is a chicken bouillon. It comes in all different flavors, vegetable, mushroom, beef. But a lot of times we use this in place of just using traditional chicken stock because it's a concentrated cube. It doesn't have to be refrigerated or anything like that. And it helps add that boost of flavor that we need when incorporating into the dishes. So what we do is we just take the cube, while still in the paper, we just break it up. And I'm also going to juice this lime. So the tricky thing with limes is sometimes you have them that are super hard and you can cut into it and try to juice it, but it's going to be a workout to try to get all the juice out. So a trick to kind of getting more juice out of it is, one, you could put it in the microwave, heat it up. It does release some of the juices, of course, but you can also just run it across the cutting board, applying some pressure, and that will help to release the juice from the inside. So just cut that right in half. We're just going to use half of that. So we're going to go over here. I'm adding the thyme and the juice of half of the lime. So again, going back to all the acid that we're adding to the meat, we have vinegar in there, we have lemon juice, and now we're adding lime juice. And that's going to help as a means to, one, boost the flavor, and then two, also to help preserve. Because as you know, with canning or pickling, you have high acidified products. It helps to keep the food safe for longer periods of time. And I'm going to go ahead and add the bouillon cube. So again, you saw it was a solid block. Right now, I'm going to just add the powder. And we're just going to make sure that everything's mixed in nice. I'm actually going to transfer this over to this burner so you can see it a little bit better. And we're going to go ahead and add a little bit of, the salt is already in there, so I'll wait till this comes up to a boil. I know that the chicken is cooked, and then I'm going to taste the liquid and adjust the seasoning from there.
Chef, we have one question before you move on to your next step.
Let's hear it.
So Sierra would like to know, since we are more confident with the safety of our chicken in the US, we may not find it necessary to wash our poultry, but if we skip that step, will we be lacking any flavor?
Absolutely not. You can still put that same vinegar and lemon juice just straight into the marinade. But it's just an extra step that even when I ask my mom, why does she do it? She just says, oh, because that's just how I grew up doing it. Even though that we are in the U.S. and she knows where the meat and stuff is coming from, and oftentimes we do get our meats from the local farms too. It's just that added step where she knows, oh, okay, this is how I grew up doing it, and I want to just follow the same steps to make sure I don't miss anything. But it doesn't change the recipe at all. Just make sure that you have the same amount of measurements going in that the recipe does call for, and you should be good to go.
Thank you.
I just forgot to bring out my rice, so I'd have to fish for that for a little bit. So when making the épice, one thing that I always mention in any interview that I'm doing is a fond memory that I do have growing up helping my mom out in the kitchen. You'll often you'll often hear me say about, I remember sitting on the floor with a pilon, which is a mortar and pestle, which is this bad boy right here. And I believe this still might be the one 20 something years ago that I was using sitting on the floor in Massachusetts, grinding up herbs and spices. It is just a traditional mortar and pestle. This one is made out of wood and it is actually from Haiti. So you can see the beautiful craftsmanship and detail that goes in there. And oftentimes these could be passed on from generation to generation. So I'm hoping, this is still my parents, I'm hoping to one day maybe inherit this and see if I can continue to do my family some justice. But this right here is used in the same fashion as a food processor would be. So of course, with modern technology, when I was making the épice, I typically make large batches because I also do have a dinner that's coming up towards the end of this month. So I was doing some testing for it. So I use the food processor for this, but oftentimes you'll see Haitians just going in with the peppers, onions, garlic, everything right into the mortar and pestle, and just sitting there mashing it until it does resemble the same texture. When I was going through and making the épice, of course, my mom gave me some instructions, just letting me know the previous times I was doing it, I was grinding it up too fine and pulsing it because the equipment that I'm working with, of course, is a little bit stronger than what she typically has in her kitchens or anything. So she says it's okay to leave a lot of the chunks in there because that's what you want to see. It helps provide a lot of color, which you can see in the chicken right there on the stove. So don't be afraid to just keep some chunks in there. It provides texture. You can see all the bits and pieces and you can actually know what's going into the dish that you're creating. So while we're waiting for all that to come up, I can see that the chicken is starting to boil over there. I'm actually just going to measure out my rice. So this again is basmati rice that we're using. It is a short grain rice and it provides like a much fluffier dish. You're able to control the water content that goes in there and it's quick and easy to cook. Less mistakes that can happen. And now that I see that this chicken has come up to the boil, I'm just going to give it like 5-10 minutes before I do taste it, just to make sure that everything's cooked, everything's safe in there. And from here, I'm going to set my oven up to broil. My broil runs a little hot, so I'm going to go ahead and just set it to the low. And I'm going to line my pan with some foil. So while we have all those things going, I'm just gonna step over here and just rinse off the rice. And rinsing off the rice, what that does is it releases the excess starch that is coating the rice. As you can see, if you could see that the water is running a little cloudy right now. So we're pretty much just gonna run the water until the water runs clear. So again, that's washing off the excess starch that's on the rice, which will help prevent all the grains from sticking to each other. All right. So now that the water ran clear, I'm just going to go ahead and set this off to the side. And from here, I have the chicken coming up to a boil. So I'm going to go ahead and just add half of the onions and peppers. So we have the green bell peppers, we have the red bell peppers. And I'm just going to go ahead and taste the liquid, make sure that it has the enough seasoning that I'm looking for. And that's going to vary based off of the amount of water that goes in, the size of the chickens. So from here, I know that the liquid is going to be reducing down. I know that it's going to continue cooking in here. And then also once I remove the chicken, I'm going to reduce it down to make the sauce. So I don't want to just yet add any more salt because as it reduces, the salt will intensify in flavor and we don't want to risk it becoming too salty. So from here, I'm just going to let it sit as is. And after I have the chicken in there, after it's been broiled, then from there, I'll add any salt or any more adobo or garlic powder that's needed. So with the beans, what we're looking for is just like that. They're starting to come out of the shell. And I would say that's just about perfect. Pretty much when you start to see that it hits the air, they start to expand. That's exactly where we want it to be. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the heat off of the beans. And I'm gonna get another strainer. And as I had mentioned, the liquid that we have the beans in, that's actually what we're going to be using to cook the rice. So I just take that, put it through the strainer. We're gonna save the beans right there. And we're gonna get that same pot right up back onto the burner. A lot of times what you can see in Haitian cuisine is a lot of one pot cooking, one to not dirty as many dishes, because oftentimes you can't see that there's no running water. So you wanna eliminate the amount of times that you are running back and forth to go into the watering hole to clean your dishes. So we use the same pans that we were just using. It's perfectly fine because it was just the beans that were in there. We're gonna use that for the beans again. So what I'm gonna do next is just get a little bit of oil in here and we're going to just fry our épices. So just enough oil to coat the bottom of the pan. And as that's heating up, as I already know that the pan is hot because we just had the beans in there, we just took it out. I'm going to add a little bit of the épices. So the épice goes right in there. And what we're doing is we're trying to cook out the raw flavors, especially because this has so much garlic in there. We want to make sure to toast that out because nobody likes eating raw garlic. So after that's been toasted off just a little bit, we're not trying to brown it or anything. We're just trying to, get the raw flavor out of all the ingredients that are in there, the peppers, the onions, and the garlic, of course. We're just gonna go right ahead and put our beans right back in. So the beans go in. We're gonna give that a nice stir, make sure that we coat the beans with all the épices. And this is also going to create a harmonious dish where we have all the flavors being represented and toasted throughout. We have the épice in the beans and the rice. We have the épice in the chicken. So it's just going to create a dish that kind of works all well together. Now from there, I'm going to measure out the amount of water that I do need for cooking the rice, which I'll just have to take a look at the recipe, make sure that I'm doing this right myself. And if there's not enough of the liquid that you cook the beans in, what you just do is add the remaining amount of liquid that you do need in water. So one of the difficulties that we've been having with launching this brand called Ensemble is really working together with my mom to be able to develop these recipes. With a lot of these different cultures and everything, oftentimes recipes are not really written down. It's just you cook in the kitchen and you put in a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and somehow mysteriously the food always tastes the same. But being able to kind of honor our heritage, I felt it was very important for us to be able to nail down all these recipes and make sure that we have actual physical documents that will allow us the opportunity to keep passing these down for generations to come. And it's been great to kind of just work alongside my mom and just get these recipes dialed in. We've been featured in some newspaper articles also, and we're just sharing all the recipes that we do have, so that way we can continue to excite people about Haitian food and explain a little bit more about what it is. Because oftentimes you see these different cultures being overlooked, and it's important for us to really just like acknowledge where we all came from and respect each other's cultures, cuisines, and appreciate the diversity that we do have. So I'm going to lower the heat on the beans. That came up to a boil. And I have my salt, garlic powder, and adobo going in there also to help flavor the rice and the beans. And I'm just going to drop that down to a very low heat while I get the chicken out. So the chicken has been bubbling, boiling away. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that and place that right onto our lined pan. And also what I do with the chicken, I don't know if you saw it before, is I actually scored it with a sharp knife, just taking little hashes in the chicken. What it helps to do is get the marinated inside and also help to ensure that the inside is cooking the same time that the outside is. So you don't have dry on the outside and still raw on the inside. So now that those are out, we have our liquid right here, and we're going to start building our stewing liquid. So we can crank the heat back up onto high, and I'm going to add tomato paste. Now, tomato paste is used, one, as a flavoring agent, but also it gives the indicative color of the poulet sauce, which is just chicken braised Creole sauce. So the Creole sauce is a sauce that can be used amongst different kinds of proteins. We have chicken, we have the goat, we have shrimp that can also be stewed in the Creole sauce. And it's just the same base. It goes with the peppers, the onions, the épices, and whatever proteins that you want to use it with. So we're just going to mix that up. I do have the oven going on broil. So I'm just going to go ahead and toss that in. And from here, now I can give a little bit more attention to the beans while I know that the chicken is in the oven. So I know that came up to a boil, so I'm going to go ahead and add the washed rice in here. and then bring that right back up to a boil. So what's funny about learning the techniques of Haitian cuisine versus the techniques involved in classical French is that typically you're asked to brown the meat before it goes into a braise or into a stew, because you're caramelizing or you're causing the Maillard reaction between the proteins, and that will develop a richer flavor. So in this sense, it's almost kind of backwards. And we do that with our pork as well, where we take the protein, we cook it, braise it, make sure all the flavor is imparted in the protein before it gets browned. And then after it's brown, then we broil it or fry it typically, and then toss it right back into the stew. So you're imparting the same flavors, you're making sure it's nice and roasted, but one step we take beforehand is just making sure that the flavor is imparted into the protein before searing it. The rice has come up to a boil, so we're just gonna stir it. And then drop it down to a simmer. And I'm just gonna stick a cover on it. The broil feature is always tricky in the ovens because you never really know what's going on in there, especially depending on what you're cooking in there. It could have high sugar content, which could cause it to burn a little bit quicker, but we just want to make sure that we're keeping eyes on that. So while I'm building this liquid, as soon as the chicken goes right back in, then we're going to add the peppers and onions back in there. We'll taste the liquid again, make sure that it's where we want it to be during this cooking process, and continue just watching it from there. So while this is all going, I'm going to check in with you guys, see if you have any questions that you wanted to ask, because this is just going to continue to stew for a little bit and kind of just watch it do its thing a little slowly.
If anyone has questions, you can just feel free to turn on your microphone and ask Chef. Chef, we did have one question earlier. Is there any way you'd be willing to share your adobo seasoning recipe with the group?
Absolutely, I can do that. I can put the file together and make sure that we get it over to you, and we can put it all in a Drive document or however is best to send it out.
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Oh, of course.
We have another question. How long does the piece last in the fridge?
That varies from person to person who you ask. Of course, in food safety standards, we want to make sure that we're using it up in a 7-day period. But for us, we keep it for months on end as long as it's under refrigeration. And again, there's so much acid in there acid and garlic in there that it does help preserve what it does have. So if I were to ask a Haitian how long they keep their piece for, they could say that they make 8 jars of this at the time. They keep it for 2-3 months. But of course, when we're doing it, we cook it in, or we make it in small batches, so that way we're making sure that we're using it in the proper recommended time frame.
Thank you.
So while this is going, I know there's a hot spot down in the back of the oven, so I'm just going to make sure to rotate this.
We do have another question for you while you're working on that. What was the best part of being on Top Chef?
There it is. I was waiting for the Top Chef questions. Honestly, it was just learning from the other chefs. You go for an experience like that, you never know which way it's going to turn out. Sometimes you can make it really far along, you can do really well, you can do poorly, and you just have to accept that you're there to really prove something to not the judges, but to yourself. you have to remember why you went on that. And for me, it was just part of learning a little bit more about who I wanted to become as a chef. So I would say sitting there with all the other chefs and hearing their stories of how they've embraced who they've become over the years, because I was the youngest that competed in that season. To hear from them what they appreciated about what they've learned in the past and how they've transformed that into who they want to become, that kind of helps to steer me in the direction that I'm currently going. So yeah, going through that whole experience, it was tough. I mean, I was opening up my second restaurant at the time, and I was gone for a 2-month window. So my daughter was 6 months at the time. The restaurant was just 3 weeks open, the second one. And just to leave that all behind to kind of chase on this dream of self-discovery, it was almost selfish of me, but I knew that that's what I needed at the time. And going through the pandemic, and then of course we were facing the protests, and even while we were in Portland, we were experiencing the wildfires. We were just getting hit with thing after thing, and I felt like that made us all bond together stronger. It helped us all come out of the whole experience stronger. We connect still as a chef community together. Last year, we were all doing dinners all across the country. I went to Aspen. I was back in Portland. I went to Texas, and doing all these things just was a constant reminder of kind of why you embarked on that journey, and who kind of brought you there in the first place. Which for me, it was one of my chefs that I actually worked with in Boston, who kind of forced me to go on this incredible journey that she took upon herself, which she's also a Johnson Wales alumni, Adrienne Mosier. So to see her experience on the show and how it transformed her as a chef, it kind of opened my eyes to say, okay, this is the time, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to make the best out of this experience. So the liquid that I just tasted, it is pretty much where I do want it to be. So I'm just going to continue to just let that stew down. And once I add the chicken again, I'm just going to make sure to add the remaining peppers and onions, and we're just going to let that cook down a little bit while we're still watching the rice to make sure that the rice is doing its own thing and not overcooking. So I do have it at a steady simmer right now. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit more. And we're just waiting for really the liquid to fully evaporate. Once the liquid evaporates from the rice, then I'm just going to turn the heat off and let it kind of just steam on its own while it's just sitting there, just to make sure that the excess liquid that might be sitting in the bottom of the pan that we can't see is fully cooked out. So from here, we're starting to pick up some color on the chicken. So we're going to be done with the chicken, so I can just cut that off. And we're going to put the chicken right back into the liquid. Just ensuring that we, again, have enough liquid to cover the chicken so it can completely be submerged. And continue the braise. So now that we have that in there, we're going to go ahead and add the remainder of our peppers and onions. And make sure that those are submerged in there also. And I'm just going to go ahead and grab a lid to cover that. And just turn the heat down just a little.
We have a lot of comments in the chat about people wishing they could be in your kitchen to smell this dish right now. Could you describe the smell for everyone?
Yes, absolutely. There's fresh aromas. I have my sister actually recording this whole thing right now, who's behind the camera. So she's wafting in the air and it's reminding her of home. Yeah, so you can smell all the fresh citrus that just went into there, the lemon juice, the lime juice, you have the herbs. I'm imagining if there was parsley in the dish because I forgot that, but you can definitely smell the thyme. You can really smell all that garlic that was associated with the piece marinated and everything. And it's just lighting up the room as, you know, it's in the rice dish, it's in with the beans, it's in with the chicken. All those flavors are just harmoniously working and singing together as we cook all this meat and rice separately.
And we have another question about the chicken.
Yep.
We noticed that you used bone-in chicken. Can this be made with chicken breasts or boneless chicken, or do you recommend the bone-in?
It can be made with boneless chicken thighs. I wouldn't recommend the breasts just because when braising breasts, they tend to become a little dry. You want something that's going to be cooked quick in that method. Things that are associated with the tougher cuts of meat, like the thighs, because it's a part of the chicken that does do a lot more of the motion. You want to really allow that the time to kind of break down its proteins, which is why we use those in a stew dish. When you're choosing your chicken from the grocery store or from the farm, what we do is we get the whole chicken in. So of course I use the breast for other aspects in the restaurant. So this chicken, I actually had the thighs that I just butchered down. So those had the drumsticks and the thighs attached. Oftentimes when you find them in the supermarket, you'll see they could just be the thighs. They could just be the thighs, or sorry, the thighs or the drumsticks, or you could have the thighs and the drumsticks together. You can keep it all together just like that, or you can separate it right at the joint to have the drumsticks cooked one separate way and use the thighs for something else. Or you can just put them all in the same pot, because again, those are the same kind of proteins that will be cooked in a typical fashion, just like this, to be braised to cook down all those proteins.
A question, is the liquid spicy hot, or do you drop back on the spiciness to accommodate American palates?
That is one question we do get asked a lot, is Haitian food spicy? I wouldn't say that it is spicy. It all depends on who's really cooking it. If you know that you're cooking for your own palate, of course, you can increase the heat by the amount of spice that you put in your piece. Or you can add, instead of using the bell pepper, you can use a habanero pepper to add in there using the clove as well, which will of course add a little bit more heat and add that sweetness and a little bit of heat from the habanero pepper. But it's really to the likings of your own palate. When I'm cooking for the crowds here in New Hampshire, of course I tone down the heat. And when I say I mean we, as in my mom. She's really the chef when it comes down to these ensemble dinners, as we're still learning about how to cook our cuisine. But we know that we have to tone it back just a little bit. And what we do offer is a spicy cabbage slaw, which is called pickles. So that is made with habaneros, onions, peppers, and cabbage, carrots. And that is a slaw condiment that's typically served with a lot of our stewed or fried meats and plantain. So it's all up to who's eating the dish, how spicy they want to actually make it. But this particularly, I know I like spice, so the spice level in here is pretty moderate. But when I'm eating it, I typically add pickles to accommodate for the extra spice. So in the bean pot, I can see that the water up top has evaporated. And I know there's a little bit left in there that's going to continue to cook. So I'm just going to cook down just a little bit more. And once I see that a lot of the bubbling has stopped, I can see that a lot of the liquid has been evaporated. Then I'm just going to turn the heat off. And from there, we can just see that the rest of the cooking will be done just through the residual heat that's left into the pan. So because the chicken was already boiled ahead of time and just broiled, it's not going to take too long to continue in this cooking process. But what we do is we just cook it down for another 10-15 minutes. And from there, it will help release start to soften the protein structure and help release it from the bone, make it nice and juicy, and make it like fall off the bone tender. And I'm just going to taste the liquid just one more time, now that I do have the chicken back in there. And it's going to take just a little bit of salt. And the bubbling in the bean pot has just subsided a little. So now again, I'm just going to keep it right off to the side and let the residual steam or heat in the pot just do the rest of the cooking. And after that, we're just going to kind of fluff it up with a fork and make it nice and fluffy.
We did get
Yes,
we did. We got a comment actually from someone that made the dish for dinner. She said it smells amazing and that she used chicken thighs. She ran out of time with the rice, but she did use an additional habanero pepper. If you want to turn on your camera and show us the dish, I know you said you tried to take a photo but Zoom wouldn't let you share it, but we'd love to see it if you have it. And while she does that, Chef, if you can spell the name of the spicy slaw that you mentioned, so Sierra can Google it. She said her boyfriend is Nigerian, so he will love the additional heat.
Absolutely. It's called Pikliz, so that's spelled Pikliz. And then along with the épice recipe, or what was the other recipe that we were going to provide? The adobo recipe. I can provide the Pikliz recipe to go along with that. So you can have the whole effect of the chicken, the épice, the Pikliz, the adobo, everything that you need to make this dish right.
That would be amazing. And we will share that with everyone in the follow-up.
Perfect. And I think from here, so we have the rice that's just finishing cooking up. I can see that there's still a little bit of excess liquid in there. So I'm going to go ahead and just cover that up. And pretty much from here, you can see once the peppers and onions start to cook down a little bit more, this chicken will also be ready. Even from that short period of time, you can already see that the chicken is just falling right off, just like that. So I think in an additional 2 to 3 minutes, that'll be exactly where we need it to. And I'm already losing a clove, which we don't want. So I'll take that right out. So I guess I can dive back into a little bit more about where I started and why I chose New Hampshire out of all places. So from Rhode Island, I worked in a couple of different restaurants up there, and it was really one of my chef instructors, which any of you have been fortunate enough to have, Chef Joe Melanson. He was really trying to push me out of my comfort zone, and he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. So oftentimes you can kind of relate to your instructors because they have actually gone through these same experiences that you've gone through. They've been culinary students, or they have been just working in the industry trying to find their way up. And it was because of Chef Joe Melanson that I wanted to pursue other opportunities in a major city such as Boston. We had a chef that was from Boston that actually came to the restaurant that I was working at, and he said, "Oh, you should go talk to her, go introduce yourself." And I shied away from it. I was like, "I'm not ready for that. I don't want to do that yet." And it wasn't until 6 months later, I think, when I actually did graduate, and I said, "You know what, chef, I think I'm going to go out to Boston." So I reached out to a couple of restaurants in Boston. I staged, of course, which is just like a little unpaid or sometimes paid internship where you just go to get a feel for the restaurant that you're going to be working in, possibly, or just experience what the atmosphere is like of some of these higher end restaurants. So I went through my stage and I fell in love with Duave, which is where I landed. So right after I graduated, I went right to Duave, right into Boston, and I just got kicked right into the restaurant scene. And that's where I found my true passion. I loved it. I didn't know too much outside of French cuisine, of course, other than what we learned in culinary classes with all the fundamentals that we did take with meat cutting and with all the international cuisines and things like that. So it was great to be able to see one true form, one true fashion taking place and saying, okay, this is French cuisine. I'm going to kind of just drive this path and see where it takes me. And from there, I had an opportunity to come back to New Hampshire, where my family did move from Massachusetts to New Hampshire. So I said, okay, after school, after Boston, let me move back to the countryside. Let me get a little bit more space, more area. I want to kind of clear my head a little bit after working in a high-paced city such as Boston for so long, that it took a lot out of me. So I wanted to kind of just take a step back. And of course, instead of taking a step back, I took 4 steps forward and decided to open my own restaurant, which to this day, I mean, we're 2.5, almost 3 years in to Greenleaf itself. During that time, I also opened up my second restaurant, which was a bakery and sandwich shop, which we produced breads, pastries, everything in house. During that time, I opened the bakery, and then I sold the bakery a year later, which was in effect to just release me some of my time, some of my stress, and focus more of my energy onto Greenleaf, which was my passion project, and of course, spend time with my daughter. So all these things that you kind of learn and go throughout your experiences through the industry, it's all real life experiences, which you kind of just have to take to heart and understand that there's no real straight path to anything. There's no straight path to victory. You kind of just have to carve your way out through every experience that you take and make the best out of it. And just having those opportunities each step of the way, there were many mistakes that I've made. There's many mistakes that I've learned from. But one of the biggest things that were to come out of it was bonding with family and learning about these family recipes. So it was very important for me to be able to say, okay, this is what I have going on in my life right now. I'm going to take a step back again and realize what truly is important to me. And being able to reflect on my childhood and learn about these things that are so sacred and not easily replicated really drew a spark and the desire for me to continue to learn and grow. And of course, I think I've made my parents proud along the way, representing the culture, doing it for our people, and just making the best of it. And of course, bringing our family back together, just as we would on any Sunday dinner that we've had together as a family in the past. So from here, I'm just going to go ahead and just remove the rice from the stove. You have the nice fluffy rice. You can see that the grains are separated. I guess I can go to this camera instead if you can see that. I don't know which camera is going where. It's hard to do this without looking at one particular screen. But now I'm going to go ahead and just remove some of the chicken and just plate it right on top of this rice. And you can see some of what it might look like at our dinner table. So the color from the sauce is indicative of the amount of tomato paste that you add in. So from here, I didn't add that much. So you can see it's not as red, but it is still just as flavorful. And you can see a lot of even the chicken has fallen off the bone inside of this stew. I can guarantee you it's still going to be just as delicious. And we use that same sauce in there to kind of just like coat the rice and use that as a sauce when we're eating everything all together. Oftentimes with this dish, you'll see fried plantain. So we use green plantain, which we refer to as banan peze. So we fry it twice. So the first time it's fried, it is cut into thick chunks. Then it's fried, then smashed and dipped into a lime water salt solution, and then fried a second time. So it's super seasoned, it's citrusy, it's salty, and it's crispy. And it perfectly accompaniments this. It provides that additional texture that you need from the lack of it in this dish, of course, because the rice is cooked just to whatever the perfection is, and then the chicken is stewed. So there's not too much of a bite going on in this dish. And then if I can just jump to my fridge real quick, I can actually bring out some of the pickles. So this is the pickles. I don't know if it's showing in there, but it is all that cabbage, carrots, peppers, habaneros, onions in there and just soak with lime juice, a little bit of salt, and vinegar. So again, this is what we use to add heat to the dish. It's just marinated and essentially just like a very, very quick pickle. Of course, the longer it sits in there, the better it will taste as all the flavors develop and become more harmonious. And then we just do it just like that. And there you have it, something that would be associated typically with a Sunday comfort food meal in my home.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Chef. Before we wrap up, does anyone have any last questions? Okay. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Lori Zabata, our Director of Alumni Relations, to close us out.
Awesome.
Thanks, Liza. Thank you, Chef Fiod, for such a wonderful demo and conversation tonight. We're grateful to you for sharing your time and for sharing this meaningful dish with us. We appreciate all that you taught us. Thank you to our audience. We hope you enjoyed the program. Alumni, please be on the lookout for an email in the next few days containing a survey so we can collect your feedback. Additionally, your registration for this event included a gift to the College of Food Innovation and Technology, which will go to work immediately to directly support our students and educators. With CFIT, JWU is building upon our reputation as a global leader in culinary education. Your gift will help our students explore the many ways food impacts people, communities, and economies, and develop practical solutions. And as an alumni donor, you also contribute to the growth of JWU's reputation, which increases the value of your own JWU degree. Thank you again for your support. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's program, Cook Along with JWU, with Chef Chris Viaud, and hope that you'll join us again for future events. For the full listing of upcoming events, please visit the alumni event calendar at alumni.jwu.edu. Thank you so much for being here with us and enjoy your evening. Thank you again, Chef. Wonderful. I wish I was there to taste it. It looks so great.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be enjoying it tonight too. So thank you all very much for joining us tonight. And be sure to celebrate Black History Month by doing some research and kind of learning about some different cultures that you haven't explored before.
Thanks, Chef. Good night,
you.
everyone.
Good night.